בוקר טוב, שבוע טוב. We are tonight, בעזרת השם, we would light the first Ner candle of Hanukkah, and also next year would be just in the middle of, more even to the end of Hanukkah. So I thought that it would be nice to pick up a figure for our next two sessions that would in some way be a continuation or in a resemblance of the Hashmonaim. And when I went through, I have my list of 20th century rabbis from which every time I pick up a rabbi to speak about, and I looked at the pool and I said, there is only one here who completely fits this description, and this is Rav Goren. If he was born in the Hashmonaim, I have no question that he would be part of the rebel. So that's Rav Shlomo Goren, an extremely interesting figure. Also, his personal history is so intertwined with the Jewish history of the 20th century. So it's not only that he's an interesting person by himself and someone that is inspiring and we have a lot to learn from. It's not only that his halachic opinions were extremely influential in almost every power position that he had been in, and he had been in a few, but also that he is, if I would have to, as I said, to point my finger to one rabbinic figure that is similar in our times to Yehuda Maccabi or to Matityahu Hashmonai, I think no question that this is going to be Rav Shlomo Goren. So that's who are we going to speak about Be'ezrat Hashem today and next week. So Rav Goren was born in 1918. He was born not as Goren, but as Goronchik in a place called Zamberov in Poland. That's near Lumzhe. People that are more familiar with Polish geography. So, so your father is from there. So yeah, it's about, they say, so I am not an expert in Polish geography. It's Lomża, thank you. And it's about 150 kilometers from Warsaw. So that's more or less the area. Most of the Jews there were Hasidim. There were also Litvaks there, but most were Hasidim, and especially there was a Gur stronghold there. So the Ger Hasidim, as they were called Ger, not Gur, they were called Ger. So the Ger Hasidim. And his father, the father of the young Shlomo, was also a Ger Hasid. He was not a Rav in profession. He was what we'd call today a businessman, Lufthansa, what they called back then. He would buy things and sell things, as many other Jews. And later he became a textile factory owner. So he was dealing with textile. How do you say? Clothes. Schmate business. No, but it seems that he was a little more than Schmate business, but you are right. These are the nice names we call it nowadays. So that was his father, but it's clear that he was a very well known, I mean, he was knowledgeable. He knew Torah. Later, when he would come to Eretz Israel, he would also serve in rabbinic positions, but he didn't want to. It was part of his point of view, which he also tried to instill in young Shlomo, and that is that you need to make your parnasa by your own hands and not by being a Rav. That was the position of his father. He had a grandfather that was a shochet, so his family was a rabbinic family. But he was also heavily influenced by his mother, whose name was Tzipora Goronchik. And as a matter of fact, he said, he published he didn't publish it, but he recorded himself. He recorded an autobiography before his passing. And Avirat, who is maybe some of you heard about him, he's like he's a media person, a media religious person, and he took all of the recordings and he published them as a book. So the book is written as an autobiography. It's written in the first person, and in the introduction, Avirat says that he didn't it only changed maybe the style, but it didn't put any new facts. So every sentence there is supposed to be a direct quote from the recordings. Obviously, I do not possess the recordings. I did use the autobiography named בעוז ובתעצומות. It maybe there is an English translation, I'm not sure. A very nice book, written very accessible, beautiful book. So בעוז ובתעצומות. So most of the information that I'm going to give here is taken from the autobiography, and we understand the problems with autobiographies, right, and the advantage. The advantage is that you get inside information, and the disadvantage is that you get inside information. So that's, I think it's very clear, but that is what I'm going to work with. So Rav Goren says that his first memory, or one of his very early memories, at the age of 3, is that his mother went to some shiur or some lecture in the local shul, and she returns home, and his father suddenly sees that her jewelry is not on her. And the father asks, where did the jewelry went? And the mother says that there was a shaliach coming from Eretz Israel, and he spoke about the need of the people that are, and we speak about the 1920, 1921. So the people that began to establish the new Yishuvim in Eretz Israel, and she was so moved by their needs, she didn't have any money in her pocket. She took off her jewelry and gave to this shaliach. I hope that the money went to where it should have. However, his father said to his mother, you know, you didn't lose anything because you gave to such a high goal, then we would buy you new and better jewelry. So that's and that was a memory that he took from that he took with him to the rest of his life, about the dedication of his parents to Eretz Israel. And also I think we see from here especially the influence that he saw his mother, and we'd see it later on also. His mother was very important in shaping and forming his personality. Now, the family moves to Warsaw, and the father, as I said, opens a textile factory, which is considered well-doing for the time, and they are able to save a little fortune. What do they decide to do with this fortune? So maybe some of you remember that we have learned about a year ago about Rabbi Yechezkel Taub, the Admor from Yablona. That was the man that established Kfar Hasidim, went with his Hasidim. However, because of problems in financial management, so he lost the money that was not his, and he made a contract with the Sochnut, giving out land that he basically promised other people that he would buy with their money, and got into trouble and tried to go and recruit money in the United States. And because of World War II, was stuck in the United States and basically became George Nagel, a completely secular person, and only to return many years later. So that was Rabbi Yechezkel Taub, the Avlona Rebbe. Now, before all of that happened, he was walking around Poland, and he was a Chashuv Admor, he was a Chashuv Rebbe, and he came from a very powerful dynasty. So for Hasidim, that was a very strong influence. And he was walking around, and basically, again, I am not in any place of judgment. I'm just trying to give the facts as they were. He was selling dreams. He was telling people, give me the money, and we would have like a buying group. So we would have this double power. Now, obviously, it was before. People didn't understand they need to hold contracts, and there would be grantees, and there would be banks accompanying. We speak 200 years ago almost already. No, I'm exaggerating, of course, 100 years ago. But people in Poland obviously didn't have this understanding of the financial system, so they just gave him the money. And they gave him a very large amount of money. They were supposed to get 100 dunam in Sheikabrek, in Nir Haifa, where the Rebbe was supposed to buy the land. So all of the money is given. The people around them think they are completely crazy, taking all the money from good old Warsaw and investing it in some forsaken place. In a place, I mean, who wants to live in Eretz Israel? You can go there and die. That's fine. People went there always to die there, but to live there and all your money to put there. So that was completely crazy. In 1925, the family indeed make Aliyah, and his parents are part of the group that founds Kfar Hasidim. However, very quickly it becomes clear that all of the dreams are pipe dreams. There are no 100 dunam anywhere. And not only there are no 100 dunams, there is no electricity, there is no sewage, there is nothing. There is malaria, a lot of malaria, and there are swamps, and there are Arabs that are not happy with them being there because we have to understand the land was bought from the legal owner, but the legal owner was not the man that's sitting on the ground. The legal owner was some Effendi sitting in Lebanon or in Syria. And he had people, the falachim, these are the simple workers, the Arab workers, they can maybe their family was there for 300 years, but they never owned the land. They were only paying rent to the Effendi owning the land somewhere in Syria or in Lebanon. So when you buy the land from this Effendi, legally you have bought the land. But the people that for 300 years walked there, of course, this Effendi doesn't even care. He does not even inform the people that he sold the land. And suddenly the Jews arrive and they say, we bought the land. And the guy sitting on there says, what do you mean? We have lived here for 300 years. Extremely complicated, as you can understand. So they were trying, basically they were terrorizing the Jews coming living in. They were still not murdering, that didn't happen yet, but they were trying to damage the corpse, the animal, the meager little that the Jews were able to have there was destroyed many times by the Arabs. So the situation was very, very complicated. Many of the Hasidim came without any knowledge of agriculture, of building anything. I mean, they were, as you said, they were shmate dealers. Again, chas v'cheila, these were also my own forefathers. So, but they were people that bought things, sold things. They knew how to speak. They knew how to manage themselves in Poland. They came here and they sat on the ground and got malaria. And they didn't know how to handle that. So the situation was extremely complicated. Now, Rav Goren says that before making the Aliyah, his father went to the Ger Rebbe, because you remember he was a Chosid. So you do not do anything without first consulting with your Rebbe. He went to the Ger and asked him if he should make the Aliyah. The Ger asked in Yiddish, I am sorry that I cannot repeat it in Yiddish, but he asked him, what would you do there? That was the answer. And it was interpreted by the father as a no. However, the mother said, you have your own Rebbe. I have my own Rebbe who is the Raziner. She went to the Raziner, and the Raziner told her, of course, it's a big mitzvah to go to Eretz Israel. And the mother won out because the Mishnah in Ktubot says that if between the couple there is a dispute, one wants to make Aliyah and the other does not, the one that wants to make Aliyah can force the other party to make Aliyah. That's the halacha. I'm not saying it's a good partnership or, I don't say it's a recipe for a good marriage. But the halacha, basic halacha is that you can force the spouse to make, I see that's, it's halacha that was applied in some cases here on the table. Listen to your wife, yes. But when they came, there was nothing, then the father began to harbor maybe wishes to go back to his factory in Warsaw. I mean, they sold it, but some relative told him that they are willing to give him loans so he'd be able to reopen the shop. And and again, these are the recollections of Rav Goren. And his father went to his mother and said, maybe we should go back. And the mother looked out of the window, and there was the graveyard. Unfortunately, some people died from the malaria, and they already buried them. And she said, from here, I'm going only there. No coming back. Of course, she saved their life because 10 years later, it's the Holocaust. So no one could know that, of course. But that's so again, you see, his mother obviously had a very strong personality, and she shaped young Shlomo. Now they opened a school in Kfar Hasidim. Uh, it was a modern school. It was not as the Cheder that the father wanted his son to learn in and to learn Torah in. And not only that, young Shlomo, we would say today, he was a gifted boy. And as you know, gifted boys sometimes find school very boring, so they begin to disrupt the class. Some of you may be aware to what can happen with gifted children. And of course, there were no programs back then. Who spoke about these things even? So he was very talented. And they say that the guys called him Goronchik Tse, meaning going to go out. Why? Because every teacher would go into the classroom, and after 5 minutes, he would say, Goronchik Tse, go out of the class. And he would play outside, and sometimes he would go near the window, and he would hear the questions from the classroom and would shout the answers inside. And he became the village roe. How do you say roe? Herder, shepherd. And he himself said later in his autobiography, he said, I was Rosh HaBiryonim, the head of the bullies. So he was not being educated well. And his father was not happy at all. And at a certain point, his mother also decided that the difficult situation, the tough conditions, that didn't break her. But when she saw that her son, his education is suffering, that was something that she was not willing to accept. So she went, again, it's amazing, it's not the father. She went to Yerushalayim, and she met with a certain Rav from the Eida Haredit that she had some connection with. And she was able to convince him to accept Shlomo, who was, again, a gifted child, but very unruly. Very unruly. So she was able to convince the Melamed there to accept her child, and the family just moved to Yerushalayim with no money at all, because they were not able to do any money. Of course, in Kfar Hasidim, they were hardly just going by. So they went to Yerushalayim, and the story is, again, it's from Rav Goren. The story is that, so we're speaking about 1928, after 3 years in Kfar Hasidim, 1928, he's 10 years old, but already you see his life are full. He has many experiences in these 10 years, because he was born in a small village, moved over to Warsaw, then moved to Kfar Hasidim, and now he's moving to Yerushalayim. So it tells the story that they were supposed, the mother, when she made the trip to Yerushalayim, she also spoke with some apartment owner in order to rent it. And she was, supposedly, there was some agreement that she and the owner came to. But again, no papers and no nothing. And when they came with a wagon, with the little furniture they had, the apartment owner told them that the agreement is cancelled. So they are just on the street. So what would they do? His father told Rav Goren and his brother, we are going to the Kotel. We'll go to the Kotel. And we daven there. And Be'ezrat Hashem, it would be good. Of course, in the meantime, his mother was going around and looking for a new apartment. But they were going, the father went with these two children to the Kotel. And Rav Goren, it was his first time in the Kotel, 10 years old. And first, before they came to the Kotel, they went through near Sha'ar HaShalshelet, where he was able to see into the Har HaBayit. And he said that was like a revelation for him. He felt that there are angels coming from the sky when he looked into Har HaBayit. That was a first impression that changed him and would later come to play in his later life. But for now, just remember that. And they continue, they go to the Kotel, and again, according to his own autobiography, according to his own recollections, in the tefillah in the kotel, he makes with himself a decision that now that he had left Kfar Hasidim, he is going to be a different child, and he would learn seriously, and he would not disappoint his parents.
And he was 10 at the time.
10 years old. Again, obviously, this is an old man looking back and rewriting his life, but it makes sense that in around this time and living for Hasidim and understanding that they left for Hasidim because he was not doing well in school, that's something I'm sure that make an impression on a child. So in the beginning, he goes to learn in this Eid Haredi school, Haider, where his mother had a connection, but he's unhappy there. Why? Again, a 10 years old child. But he decides that he supports Rav Kook. You remember that the chief rabbi at the time is Rav Kook. But in Yerushalayim, you have the Kookniks and you have the anti-Kookniks. Eid Haredit is anti. They are against Rav Kook. So he is not happy learning. Ideologically, he does not agree with the line of the school. Now, again, I find it hard to understand a 10 years old child, but obviously he formed a very strong decision, and he told his mother that he wants to leave and to go to a school that is more aligned with his ideology. Now, his father also supported it because at this time, again, the father was always looking for some type of work. He tried to reopen some clothes factory, but it didn't go well. So his father became a mashgiach kashrut, one of the first mashgiachei kashrut in Eretz Israel. And he was hired by Rav Kook, because Rav Kook was the chief rabbi. So the family formed a connection with Rav Kook. And Rav Goren, so the father also was happy to move his child to a school that would be better aligned with Rav Kook. And they decide to move Shlomo into the yeshiva, the yeshiva ktana that was called Etz Chaim, headed by Rav Iser Zalman Meltzer, a very famous Yerushalmi institution at the time. And young Shlomo comes in, and he sits in the class according to his age, and he says, I have nothing to look for here. I want to skip 4 classes. And so you can imagine that nowadays it won't even begin to fly, because you would have to get even 1 year is very, very difficult. The pedagogics, how it's called, vada, and they committee. It's very difficult to do anything. But he wanted to skip 4 classes. So he goes into the room of the menahel, of the administrator, and he says, I want to skip 4 classes with his father. And he tested him, and he said, 3 classes is fine, but not the 4th. So Shlomo Goren says, if that is so, I won't continue my learning here. Yeah, that's the man. And so in 1929, the family again moves, and this time to Rehovot, and he goes to learn in Petach Tikva, which I guess was somewhere near. That means it was considered. I guess Kvish Arba was less. There was less traffic. so the family lived in Petach in Rehovot, and he was learning in the big yeshiva, Lumja yeshiva in Petach Tikva, where they did allow him to skip the 4 classes he wanted to skip. However, after 2 weeks, on Friday, he decided that before Shabbat, he wants to immerse himself in a mikvah. Beautiful. He won't go to a mikvah. He went to one of the pardesim, where there was some water pool. And so basically he swam at a water pool on Friday. When he went back, he was caught by the head of the yeshiva. And the head of the yeshiva said, where have you been? And he told him, I went to take a deep mikvah before. So the Rosh Yeshiva didn't like it. Now, the Rosh Yeshiva didn't throw him. But Rav Goren thought that even trying to schooling him, I mean, that was an infringement on his free being. So he decided he won't remain in the yeshiva. I think that we already see the type of personality we're speaking about, right? So and we are only at the age 11. And he is going from institution to institution, looking for exactly what he wants. He is not going to shape himself according to institution, what is usually what we expect of students his age to do, right? We expect the kid to go into a school, and the school is helping us shaping him in the way that we want him, not for someone like Rav Goren. Now, I'm sure that in 95% of these children, the system completely fails them, and then it doesn't end good. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu really was supervising his ways. And so, in 1929, also there were, of course, מאורעות תרפ"ט, the pogroms of 1929, and Rehovot is considered an unsafe place, and Petah Tikva is also not safe. So the family wants now Shlomo to move to another yeshiva. What is this yeshiva now? So Shlomo says, what is the best yeshiva in Eretz Israel? Hebron, no? It's Hebron. Hebron. That is Slobodka that made Aliyah. At first they said in Hebron. However, after the pogroms of 1929, they leave Hebron and go to settle in Jerusalem, first at Geula and then at Givat Mordechai, where they are to this very day. So he, at the age of 11, goes to learn in Hebron. However, Hebron is equivalent to high school and up. So basically, you're supposed to be 16 or 17 in order to be accepted. He goes there and he goes into the room of the Rosh Yeshiva. And the Rosh Yeshiva says, here is not a kindergarten. It's not up to you. Rav Shlomo says to him, Rav, he's 11 years old, 12 years old, 12. He says to him, test me. If I fail the test, I would go without any quells. But if I pass the test, you need to take me in. So the Rosh Yeshiva, I'm sure, it's a child, fine, let's play the game. And of course, young Shlomo Goren nails it. And the Rosh Yeshiva has now no other choice. And the young Shlomo Goren sits in Hebron. The Rosh Yeshiva says to him, you know, if you want to really grow in Torah, my advice to you is you should learn every day 7 pages of Gemara. That way you'd finish the whole Shas every and each year. And young, again, 12 years old, he begins to learn 7 blats, 7 dapim a day. That's a part of what you just learned in the yeshiva, in addition. So you would sit there, a 12 years old child, sitting in the yeshiva with the old boys, and you know, turning pages. They were all, and he was very noisy. He had a very outgoing personality. So you couldn't miss him. The other boys were sure that he's making games. So once when he went to the washroom, someone replaced the copy of the Gemara. And they were sure that he's just turning pages, so there would be another Gemara, and you continue to turn pages. Rav Goren was very insulted by that. He knocked on the bima of the yeshiva, and he said, anyone wants to take me to the exam on what I learned is invited to do so. And so a few guys, and you know guys, so immediately there was a line of guys wanting to demonstrate to the young imposter, right, that is a show, and they begin to ask him. So they begin a line in the Gemara, and he's able to continue from memory. They begin a line in Rashi. They begin a line in Tosfot. He's able to repeat it, the whole Tosfot by heart. Of course, that already makes noise, and he begins to be known in all of Yerushalayim as a young Yeled Pele, as a young Ilui. He's learning, he's the first one in the Bet Midrash at morning, he's the last one to leave the yeshiva at night, and as I said, he's learning very much aloud. And he's telling in his autobiography that one night he was learning and he didn't want to fall asleep, so he was shouting and shouting and shouting. The neighbors invited the police, called the police, the British police, and what are you doing in the middle of night? He said, I'm learning Torah. They asked him to be a little quieter. At another time, there was a curfew, and he was walking at night, and of course he was completely oblivious to anything that is going on. And this time it was again a cup, but this time an Arab cup, and he gave him food to a child. So he gave him a slap. And the next night, the same thing happened because he continued to do the same thing. So he gave him two. And from there on, Rav Shlomo would try to go through sidewalks. Okay. Uh, so he's obviously he's a genius. Now the question is, what do you do with a genius? Right? It's a big question because it's very easy to waste geniuses because he would learn and learn, that's fine, but nothing would come out of that. I mean, you can say the Torah comes out of it, which is beautiful, but how do you harness your powers to something that is extremely constructive? That's what we are looking for. One of the problems is there is no money. So even if the yeshiva is willing to just take him for free, but there is no money for books. There is no. His family is poor. Now, in another amazing turn of history, his father is making friends with no other than Nachman Chaim Bialik, the national poet. And he tells Chaim Nachman Bialik that his son is a prodigy, he's a genius. And Bialik wants to meet the young, brilliant boy. And at one of the times that Bialik, for some reason, goes to Yerushalayim, he goes to Chevron Yeshiva and he meets with the young Shlomo Goren. He's extremely impressed by the many sees. And Bialik knows many, many Jews all around the world. And he knows a Jew in Latvia, very rich, who is looking to support the next Gadol. And so Chaim Nachman Bialik is able to secure a patron, basically, that would support Rav Goren for the next 20 years. Not only Rav Goren, also his family is paying for a new home. So suddenly everything becomes much, much easier, and Rav Goren is able to sit, and now Rav Goren wants to write something for the honor of this patron. So he is writing a book at the age of 16, a book about Rambam in Hilchot Kodshim. Now, I am not sure what you were doing, engaged in the age of 16. I have to admit that I was not engaged with Rambam in Hilchot Kodashim, and of course I was not able to read anything about it, let alone write chidushim about the Rambam in Hilchot Kodashim. He writes the sefer. He gets askama from Rabbi Zalman Meltzer and from Rav Kook. So Rav Kook writes an askama that is, I think that's the last askama that Rav Kook wrote. He was already on his deathbed, and he writes an askama, beautiful askama, praising the young man and saying that he surely would become one of the main giants in Am Israel. Now, again, things are it's like his life are being led by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's no other way to see it. So then his father, his name became very known because of the sefer and the haskamot, and he's a genius. So there is a certain Rebbe in Chicago who wants to marry him to his daughter. Okay. So they hide the name because it seemed there was a problem with the daughter. I would continue with the story. So they don't give the name. And this Rebbe in Chicago, Hasidic Rebbe, so he pays for Rav Shlomo's Goren father to go to the Rav Shlomo himself doesn't need to go, but the father needs to go and see if he gives his agreement to the offer. So the father goes there and he meets with the Rebbe, and they pour money on him and lavishes and everything. One thing he doesn't get to see the bride. So he begins to suspect. He begins to suspect that something is off. They try to get some promise from him before he sees the girl. In the end, he doesn't agree, and the whole thing is canceled. However, because he went, obviously not with an airplane, he went in a boat, in a ship, but he took all of the Nezer HaKodesh books with him. So they sold more copies in America than in Israel of this book. The name comes to Rav Eliezer Silver, who I think we didn't speak about, but he was a very important Rav in the United States of the time, was the head of the Agudat HaRabbanim, Rav Eliezer Silver. and they are all very impressed with the sefer. They write letters, and he gets a job offering from Yeshiva University. They said, such a young genius, why not go here, come here? I mean, they were looking for Ramim. In America, it was difficult to find Gdolim Torah, and Rav Soloveitchik was not still didn't come. So they were looking, and they offered the young Rav Shlomo Goren to go. We can only imagine what would have happened if he would have accepted the offer. However, until the father is able to come, and until they think about it, and World War II breaks. So, 1939. 1939, and Rav Goren is 21 years old, still not married, but in Hebron it was fine. 21, not married was fine. It's not Hasidim. By Hasidim, 21, that's it. You are off the game. But in the Litvak world, in the Litvish world back then, it was 21 was fine. So he's not married. He's laying up a storm. He's a gaon. He's really a gaon. He already finished all of the Bavli a few times. He's now learning also the Yerushalmi. He began to write. What he wants to do now, what he's working on now, is he calls it Shari Tahara. What is it? He took the Mishnah of Mikvaot. There is no Talmud, neither Bavli or Yerushalmi, on Mishnah Mikvaot. So he decides he would write the Talmud on the Mishnah of Mikvaot. So he would collect from all the Shas, all the Sugiot, everywhere they are, on Mikvaot, gather them all, tie them together, and produce a Gemara on Mikvaot. That's the project that he's taking upon himself. Of course, again, you need to have a lot of self-confidence in order for, in the age of 21, to decide you'd write Gemara on the Mishnah of Mikvaot. So he's working on that. But when he sees how things are turning, he joins the Haganah. And he also joins, in order to become a guard, there were different ways in which you can become a guard for the Jews. One of them was to להתנדב, to volunteer to the British police. So that was called Gapir. So he volunteered as a Gapir. There was a sworn-in the ceremony they were able to take. So they needed to take. So he said a few dozen people stood there and took the oath. And while they were taking the oath to comply with His Majesty's commands, then he was singing Kol Nidre. All my vows are cancelled. All my that's how he describes. That's how he describes. You understand the type of person. So that's how he describes it in his book. And he becomes a Gapir. They give him a gun. They teach him how to use it, and he begins to guard at nights. So at days he sits and learns, and at nights he guard. When does he sleep? I guess this type of people don't need to sleep. 1940. He is finished with the project of the Gemara on Mikvaot. And he publishes that, again, acclaimed and praised by the most important Rabbanim. And then he decides that the next step, he wants to write, and he is being led to that by Rav Herzog, who was the chief rabbi. After the Ptira, the passing of Rav Kook, Rav Herzog became the chief rabbi. Rav Herzog we spoke about him. So he had a doctorate himself, if you remember, from Ireland. So Rav Herzog wants Rav Goren, the young genius, to write a scientific Peirush on the Yerushalmi. But in order to write a scientific Peirush, you must be exposed to science. So Rav Herzog says to the young Rav Goren, they just opened the Hebrew University in Yerushalayim. Go there and learn. Now, don't learn anything Jewish. Gemara you learned in yeshiva, that's fine. Go there and learn math. Go there and learn maybe philology. Go there and everything that is not Jewish, you can learn the philosophy there. So he goes there. Obviously, his Rashi Yeshiva in Hebron are going nuts because it's completely asu to go and learn in university. So their best student is now going and learning in university, but they don't want to throw him out. So it's very conflictive. He himself understood that that is not something that would be good for the other yeshiva students, so he was not shouting it out aloud. However, in the university, he meets a girl. Yeah, that's how it works. He meets a girl named Tzfia Cohen. Now, who is Tzfia Cohen? She is no other than the daughter of Rav David Cohen, also called the Nazir. We had a shiur about him also about a year ago. So he is Harav HaNazir. His daughter learns in university. Why not himself also learn in university? And it's amazing. He meets with her. Obviously, he's impressed with her father. That's obviously very important. He also impressed with her. They meet on a philosophy. I mean, there was a debate. He liked debates, as you can, I think, guess. He very much liked debates. So he would go to debates many times. And in one of these debates, she also participated. I don't know if they were one against the other, one with the other. However, there was an immediate chemistry. Now, another thing which I found, I think it's very rare. In his autobiography, he said she was the daughter of David Cohen, and she was very smart and very outspoken, and also the most good-looking girl in the whole of the university. So he writes that. He says that. Yeah. Okay. Amazing. I don't know how many rabbis you can find that would say that's yeah. So I think that's amazing. But he was an honest man. So it was part of, again, obviously, if that was just someone that was good looking, but if she was not coming from a good home and she herself was not smart, obviously that would not tempt him. But yes, he's honest, as I said. And they get married. They had many interesting stories. When they were engaged, they were traveling all around Eretz Israel, and they once went to Me'arat HaMachpelah. They wanted to visit Me'arat HaMachpelah. However, it was not such a smart move because Hebron was a very dangerous place at the time. It was after 1929. The Jews already ran away. So that was a dangerous place. They were just going in without too much thought. And he writes he said, but it was written in his autobiography that if it was not for a certain British officer that suddenly saw them on the bus, going there with all the Arabs around them and no Jew at sight, then they would have been in very big troubles. So he said, to this day, I don't know. I think that this cup was sent by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to guard us. And they go to Mata Machpelah. They die. Again, beautiful stories. And they get married, and they live in a house in Yerushalayim. Years pass by. He begins to write his Perush on Yerushalmi. Unfortunately, he only had been able to publish one volume on Gemara on Yerushalmi Brachot, and that is because life just now became interesting. 1945, he joins first the Haganah. As I said, he joined the Haganah, but the Haganah was not active enough. So he leaves the Haganah and he joins the Lehi. He has a slick. You know what a slick is? A hiding place for weapons. So they dug a hole beneath his beth, and there was a whole slick of weapons there. Also, when a few prisoners of Lehi that were supposed to be hanged, so they ran from the British prison in Yerushalayim, they hid one of them in their home, which was extremely dangerous, in their home in Yerushalayim. And basically, his house was a station for the Lehi. So it was always open for them. Even when the Rav or his wife were not home, then everyone knew that they are able to use the house. However, he himself says that he did not agree with every act of the Lehi. And he specifically says, I was opposed to the harming of non-combatant Arabs, because the Lehi sometimes would do acts in which, as a revenge for what the Arabs did, they would go to the same village that the terrorist came out from, and they would just plant a bomb in the coffee house or something in the Arab village, and they would not necessarily hit the people that were the terrorists. Rav Goren felt that is unjust and incorrect. And I would like to read with you something that he wrote many years later, but he didn't change his mind.
Maybe were very violent. They were violent too.
They were very violent. The British saw them as terrorists. Yeah. Now, he published a responsa, maybe his most important work, called Mesiv Milchama, Answers of War. And he decides that the first article in a book about war would be the Isur, the ban against bloodshed. So that's a very surprising choice, to open a book about wars with an article about the ban against bloodshed. And that's what he says. I would read it, source Aleph. אין ספק, I would share it also in the Zoom, just a second. It says, אין ספק שחיי האדם הם הערך העליון בתורת ישראל. So there is no doubt that human life are the highest value in the Torah of עם ישראל, בהלכה ולפי מוסר הנביאים, and according to the morals of the prophets. והמדובר לא רק בחיי ישראל. We do not speak here only about Jewish life. אלא בחיי כל אדם שנברא בצלם האלקים. Every person that was created in the image of God. And here he has a very long paragraph trying to convince and trying to argue that there are different versions, and sometimes he does say Adam Israel, but the real version is Adam. I skip here all of these philology, in which I guess he's using what he had learned, and then he says, על אף מצוות הלחימה המפורשת בתורה, even when we are waging war according to the commandment in the Torah. מצווים אנו לחוס גם על האויב. We must have mercy even on the enemy. It's amazing. שלא להרוג אפילו בשעת מלחמה, אלא בזמן שקיים הכרח להגנה עצמית. So we should not kill even at time of war, only if it is a necessary in order to self-preservation, to defend ourselves, ולצורך כיבוש. And if we try to conquer ארץ ישראל, and they stand in our way, we are also allowed to kill who stands in our way to conquer ארץ ישראל, but not beyond it. ולא לפגוע באוכלוסייה בלתי לוחמת, but you are not allowed to injure, to harm, non-combative population. ובוודאי שאסור לפגוע בנשים וילדים שאינם משתתפים במלחמה. And he says, and for sure, it is unallowed, it is not allowed to harm women and children that do not participate in the war. And again, I want to continue to read from inside because I would like to also do something for Hanukkah, which he has there here. So I just say, but it is important. He gives us an example, the story we just read 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, of Shimon Levi in Shechem. So as you remember, Dinah was kidnapped and raped. And now Shimon Levi wants to save her. Right? They want to rescue her. But in the process, they kill all the men of Shechem. And Yaakov is criticizing them for that. Now, says Rav Goren, there is a machloket between Ramban and Rambam. Ramban sides with Yaakov Avinu, saying that really what Shimon and Levi did was unjust. However, Rambam says that it was just. Why? Because the people of Shechem should have stopped their prince from kidnapping Dinah. Says Rav Goren. So, okay, this is the machloket. Now says Rav Goren something that is amazing. He says, so according to Rambam, why did Yaakov Avinu criticize Shimon and Levi if they did the right thing? Because the people of Shechem were to be blamed. So why does Yaakov criticize them? Says Rav Goren, when we speak about bloodshed, there is the line of the law, and there is midat chasidut. There is the act of the pious. And the pious should be more careful with human life, even when according to the line of the law, you are allowed to take them. So he says, according to the Rambam, Shimon and Levi were right if they would go in front of a martial court. But a Jew should act better than what would be okayed by a martial court. So even when you are allowed, you shouldn't kill the innocent. I am not aware of anyone that wrote so sharply. Now, he is not a man writing from some air-conditioned hall. As Be'ezrat Hashem we would describe at length, Be'ezrat Hashem, next week. He was a Rav Tzvai for 20-something years. He participated actively in Israel wars. He knew very well the risk and the dangers. And for me, at least, that's a very strong statement from someone, and he was not some, a naive, someone that doesn't understand the word. He was very, very knowledgeable of the way of war. And he was not afraid to use his gun when he needed. But he said, not only that when it is unneeded, you shouldn't use it, even if it is allowed, you should ask yourself if that is the way of the pious. I think that's a statement in itself extremely strong, and that's what he decides to put at the beginning of the book. Oh, that's the declaration of priorities. So that's one thing. Excuse me. So he said, I was objecting when they were trying to injure the innocents. In 1948, Rav Goren he returns to the Haganah. Very interesting. Why he returns to the Haganah? So that's one theme that is very important in Rav Goren. He was very, in Hebrew we call it mamlachti, statement-like. He understood that if you want to have a state, you cannot have Haganah and Etzel and Lechi and everyone is doing whatever he wants. If you want to have one state, you need to have one people, you need to have one fighting force. You need to have achdut. It doesn't mean that everyone has to think alike, but we need to work together. And he said the platform that should be used is the Haganah. So although I have many disagreements with the ways of work, I am going back to join them because the new state would sprout from the Haganah and what would later be called the IDF would go from the Haganah. So he rejoins the Haganah. I would return to some of the stories, Bezrat Hashem, next week. There is one thing I want to say here in the 5 minutes that that I am left with regarding Shabbat, because it has to do with the Hashmonaim, and I wanted to finish with something for Chanukah. So in 1948, there is a siege on Yerushalayim, and the state is being declared, and the Arab states around us declare war on the nascent state. And there is an information coming in that the Jordans are about to break through to Yerushalayim with tanks. The only way to stop them is by digging an anti-tank, how it's called? Trench. Thank you, trench. However, you cannot dig on the day because there are snipers shooting. You can only dig at night. But the information came in on Friday morning. So you would need to dig on Shabbat. And they come to Rav Goren, who was the Rav Rashi. Again, I would go back to how he became the Rav Rashi later, next week. But he was the Rav Rashi Tzvai. And they said, we need you to encourage the yeshiva students, the lochamim, the warriors themselves, they have to stay in their guard posts. So you need to encourage the yeshiva students in Yerushalayim to go and dig the trenches on Shabbat. And he goes to Rav Herzog. And Rav Herzog says, we can both wave heiterim how long we want, but the yeshiva students in Yerushalayim would not listen to us. They listen to Rav Dushinsky, who was the Rav of the Eida Haredit. And Rav Goren, a young man, goes to Rav Dushinsky. And Rav Dushinsky says to him, Rav Dushinsky is hiding somewhere, and he finds him, and he comes in, and everyone is shouting at him, you are the Tzionim, because of you we are in this trouble. And etc., etc., etc. They say to him, you are a rodef. Right? Because of you, we are in danger. He has a gun. He gives them the gun. Says, if I'm a rodef, please shoot me. That's the halacha. Right? That if I am the one that causes you danger, then you are allowed to shoot me. Please. Of course, no one wants to shoot him, so he goes, rodef, a prosier, a pursuer. If someone pursues someone else in order to kill him, you're allowed to kill the pursuer. So they blamed him for being a pursuer because he is bringing death as a Tzioni. He brings Dalet. Reish Vav, Dalet, Pei Sofit. Yeah. Yeah, but the other way around. That's exactly. Exactly. So he comes into Rav Dushinsky and he says to him, you know, we have this information and we must dig the trenches. And Rav Dushinsky says to him, why on Shabbat? So he explains to him that there is no other way. Dushinsky says, you know, we are allowing breaking the Shabbat when there is a sick person in front of us. We do not break the Shabbat if it is not in front of us. That's the halacha of pikuach nefesh. It's only when the sickness is in front. Otherwise, we can always break the Shabbat. Goren says, yes, but now it's a war. And Rav Goren understands that Rav Dushinsky was a Gaon, but he was not able to bridge from the old world into the new. He was not able, and he was not willing, and he was not interested. Rav Dushinsky says, that's a problem you created. That's a problem you would solve. Don't come to me in order to give you heterim for what is asu. And Rav Goren comes out from Rav Dushinsky. And he goes back to Rav Herzog and says to Rav Herzog, we have no other choice. We must do it. And they publish the hater. Rav Dushinsky does not oppose. That would say to his benefit. He doesn't publish an opposing opinion. And Rav Herzog himself went out to dig the trench on Shabbat. And the yeshiva student that saw Rav Herzog going out they understood it's serious. And they also joined. But suddenly, Rav Goren, that's right, that is the second article in the Meshim. The first one is about bloodshed. The second one is about Shabbat. And he says, from the time of the Hashmonaim, we didn't understand what does it mean to fight on Shabbat. And he says, so that's why I cannot only bring proofs from halacha. I need to go to history. And he digs into the Sifrei Hashmonaim, and he digs how they fought on Shabbat. And he says, you see that also them, when they were confronted with this new reality of having to wage war on Shabbat, they didn't change the halacha, but they relearned it and reapplied it in a way that would be adapted to the changing reality. And he learns from there, from the Hashmonaim, he writes that. I learned from the Hashmonaim how we should apply halacha to our days. So Rav Goren is not only that he is the halachic warrior such as the Hashmonaim, he also, he says in his own writing, he says, I learned from them how a Rav should apply halacha to his own times. So that's, we didn't have the time to read it, but if you want, that's in the second source here on the page. In Mirza Hashem, we would continue our learning about this extremely interesting and great person, Bezrat Hashem, next week. And until then, Chanukah Sameach.
Did he establish some like yeshivot or?
Later in his life, as we would speak about Bezrat Hashem next week,